Your Daily 180, 180 seconds of pure Bible study.
Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 4 is one of the great contrasts that we find in Scripture. Verses 1 through 3 of the book of Ephesians, chapter 2, points out the horribleness, the sinfulness of sin. But verse 4 begins, "But God, who is rich in mercy because of His great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. For by grace you have been saved." You know, that's one of the great contrasts because we were in such a hopeless, helpless state. There was a time when people were completely lost, without hope, and those people obey Christ, and now they are part of His glorious family, the church of Christ, the church which belongs to Christ. Now, quickly, I want to do a little review of verses 1 through 3 and talk about the sinfulness of sin. I want you to notice verse number 1, sin kills innocence. It talks about the fact you were dead in your trespasses and sins. You remember Adam and Eve. They were in a state of absolute innocence in Genesis chapter 3. But when they made the decision to rebel against God, they were dead in their sins. That's what God said would happen in Genesis chapter 2, verse number 17. Also, I want you to notice in verse 1 that sin kills ideals. The idea of sin is to miss the mark. If you're aiming at a target, you're aiming at the bullseye. To not hit the bullseye is to be less than what you were aiming at. That's the very idea of sin. Now that also emphasizes why we need grace. Trespass is the idea of getting off the path. We all do that sometime. And when we choose to live that way, when we choose not to aim at the target, it just kills our ideals. Sin kills the will. In chapter 2, verse 2, it talks about the pattern in which we once walked. It is the idea that, once you begin down that path, pretty soon sin begins to attack our intellect and we decide that it's okay to go in the wrong direction. Also, we see in verse 2 that sin is consistent with the values of this world and of Satan. 1 John 2 and verse 2 says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world." Also in verse 2, we see that sin is characterized by disobedience. And then sin in verse 3 is a life at the mercy of desire. We always want more and more and more that's contrary to the will of God. There is hope, and that hope is found in Jesus Christ. Join us again tomorrow.